Welcome to today's webcast. This call is being recorded. I'd now like to begin the program. I'd like to introduce Nathan O'Brien.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors, children of all ages, and welcome to today's webcast, Best Practices for Office 365 Data Protection, presented by Redmond Magazine and sponsored by Spanning by EMC. I am Nathan O'Brien, but in a way, aren't we all? Terrible jokes aside, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning. Before we begin today's webcast, I'd like to cover some housekeeping details. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation. So if anyone has any questions you'd like to present to either of our speakers, you do have the chat box there on the left side of your console. We'd ask that you put those questions in there, and we will endeavor to address every one of them we can. We have reserved a good portion of the last part of our hour here to answering those questions, so hopefully we get a bunch of really great and interesting questions that we can address. And finally, this event will be archived and available for replay. You will receive an email within the next 48 hours or so informing you when the replay is available. And now, on to the webcast. We have a couple of speakers for you today, so I'll start off with introducing us. First, myself, Nathan O'Brien. Quite coincidentally, I will be serving as your Office 365 subject matter expert, along with my hosting duties this morning. I am a MCSM for Exchange. I'm also an Office 365 MVP. My day job, I work as a consultant for a company called SPS. I do Office 365 Exchange migrations mostly. And up there on the screen is some information. You can follow me on Twitter or see my blog post. Joining me today will be Gina Rosenthal. Gina, why don't you say hello to the good people?
Hello, good people.
Outstanding. That'll work. Gina is a principal product marketing manager for Spanning Backup for Office 365. Spent about 15 years as a technical type person working around the industry. And you can see Gina's information there. There's her blog and her Twitter handle. All right, so let's get this thing going. We wanted to start off our agenda today. Yep, it's all updated. Okay, so our agenda for today, we're going to talk about data considerations when you move to the cloud, Office 365 specifically. We're going to talk about native backup features and functionality in Office 365, the features and functionality that you get when you sign up for your subscription for Office 365. And we're going to talk about the benefits of cloud-to-cloud backups. As we get started here, we wanted to ask you a quick poll question. We want to see how far along your organization is in migrating to Office 365. So those of you in attendance, if you would be so kind as to respond. I'll leave the poll question up here for a brief time while you record those responses. Getting a few responses there.
Where do you see people when you said that you do a lot of these migrations? Where are people, what's your sense of how people are with regards to thinking about moving or getting all the way over to Office 365?
Yeah, I've been doing Office 365 migration since pretty much day one Office 365 launched. I believe the first day it was available or very close thereafter, I had a migration set up, launching. That was an interesting time back then before we had our hybrid configuration wizard for Exchange, so it was quite a different experience. At that time, I think my first organization was a university. I've done a few other universities since then. Microsoft gives free licenses to universities, especially for the students, so I've moved a lot of mailboxes that way. How are organizations on the being ready? I don't know. It depends on the organization. I think we started off with some pretty brave organizations, mostly educational in the beginning, that were getting free resources to move to Office 365. I've seen an interesting mix of small and large companies moving. I think Office 365 for a small organization is probably a really great idea if you don't have the manpower to run a full Exchange deployment. I'm going to say that's good enough time, though, for people to answer my poll question. So we're going to forward here and look at the results. All right. So let's push this to the audience. I think that'll work. Oh, push the results. That button. There we go. All right. So looking at the audience, we can see probably most of the people on our call today are completely migrated, but have a close to equal number of people that are, well, actually about half the people on the call are either in the process of migrating or investigating options. All right, so let's move into the part where I talk about stuff for a few minutes, as if I haven't already been talking for 10 minutes. All right, as we get started here, I kind of wanted to share a little bit of an anecdote, a bit of an experience I had fairly recently doing an Office 365 migration for an organization, a rather large company I'm sure most of us would be familiar with. As I'm wrapping up this migration, having conversations with the CIO, he asked me the question, what is Microsoft's business continuity plan for Office 365? This question, I must have shown a little confusion on my face, a little not the look that he wanted me to give, and he very quickly turned into his kind of CIO speaking voice that C-level executives seem to have. He rephrased his question and said, Microsoft does have a business continuity plan for Office 365, don't they? And this was a question that was much easier for me to answer with no confusion. I was able to nearly instantly come back with, of course, Microsoft has a business continuity plan for Office 365. We went on into the conversation a little bit. He said, okay, well, they've got a plan. Can you give me a link to that? That was a little bit of a harder question to address again. So as I go into the conversation with this gentleman, he's basically wanting, to provide him with Microsoft's plan for what happens if his email goes down. We, talked about this a while, and really what it came down to is the information that's available in the service level agreement and in the product description is really what you're going to get from Microsoft. Of course, Microsoft has business continuity plans for Office 365. Microsoft knows what they're going to do if something breaks. But Microsoft's business continuity plans are really for Microsoft's business, not for your business. Microsoft has plans for maintaining their business, keeping their infrastructure going as best they can so that they can continue to bill you. It's not really Microsoft's job to keep your business running in the event that there is an outage. If there is an outage, Microsoft, of course, is going to do everything they can to bring that back up, to save your data as quickly as possible. But they're not in the business of providing their customers with a business continuity plan. What I ended up doing with this particular CIO is we took his existing business continuity plan for his on-premises Exchange deployment, and we ended up going through all the information that he had in there, and I kind of highlighted the parts of it that were going to need to change. He had things in there like, we do quarterly failover tests of our data center. Well, that's not really going to be something that he's going to continue to do. He can't ask Microsoft to fail over his mailboxes from one data center to another. it's not going to be an option for him. Another part of that we ended up addressing was his backup situation. He had a backup plan. He had how mailboxes were backed up, where that data was stored, how it was kept off-site, all that as part of his plan, and what he would do if either there was a standard user did something silly and needed to have part of their mailbox restored, or if there was a catastrophe that required a full rebuild of the environment. He had all that really well mapped out, but as he's moving to Office 365, what he had was no longer relevant. As you can see, reading through the Office 365 service level agreements, Microsoft doesn't really back up your data in Office 365. Microsoft does use, for Exchange specifically, Exchange native data protection, which is, very good bit of information, set of features that does a good job of protecting your information in the event of a catastrophic failure. If Godzilla attacks one of Microsoft's data centers, your data is going to be safe in another data center. If a hard drive fails, your data is going to be safe on another hard drive somewhere. But Microsoft's backup system isn't really, Exchange native data protection isn't really a backup system, and it isn't really built for backing up and restoring user data, especially in those what I think are all too common instances when a user does something fairly boneheaded and deletes part of their data themselves. Office 365 is designed so that if a user deletes data, then the user meant to delete that data, and that data is going to be shortly gone forever. So that's kind of that conversation that I had there. Hopefully that sheds some useful light on the situation for you all. And again, we'd like to see those questions keep rolling in, as I'm going to pass this off to Gina now. Gina's going to take over, talk a little bit about Spanning Backup and their solution and what they offer. Gina.
All right. I might ask you some more questions, though, as we go along, if that's okay. Because you brought up some really interesting, okay, cool, because you brought up some really interesting points about what you did when you were doing this migration and talking to the CIO about Microsoft's business continuance plan for Office 365. I kind of wanted to go back to some really basics, because even hearing what you were talking about, I think the basics are pretty important, because it sounds like that's what you had to do with that CIO, was go back to the basics of what are you actually doing on premises with Exchange and what's different about going to 365. So one of the things I talk about with people a lot is just the whole idea of the difference between backups and the difference between archives. From a backup perspective, from a data protection perspective, not even from a cloud or from a Microsoft perspective, backing up data is really simple. You just make a copy of it to be used again some kind of way. So backup data, when we talk about it kind of generically most times, is that's the data, the production data that you're backing up that you want to restore quickly. So if it's in production and one of your users does a boneheaded thing and loses something or deletes something, you want to have it someplace where you can restore it quickly, so everything in production returns to normalcy and everybody keeps working. And the data we use for archive data, we're keeping that for compliance, either from government compliance standards or from business compliance standards. That data has to be kept for a certain amount of time, but we're not really expecting to go and dive and find an email message and restore that archive data back into production. So just kind of wanted to talk about the basics of that. And then business objectives. Backups have to be tied to these business objectives. And what that is just email recovery. For that production data, how long can you be without that email, and how far back do you have to go to be able to find it? If I deleted it yesterday, can that copy from yesterday, is that good enough, or do I need one from 3 or 4 hours ago? And retention, which ties into archives, is how long do you need to keep that? What does your business say how long you need to keep that? And legal holds, or litigation hold, which is actually a legal term, those are specific to what your company believes they would have to produce if they were ever put under a legal hold, a litigation hold. So if they got a letter from a lawyer saying, we're taking you to court and we need you to produce all the emails you had on this topic. That's what legal hold is all about. And that too depends on who you put on legal hold. You know, are there people in your organization that there's pretty strong, it's pretty reasonable to expect that at some point in the lifetime of their time at your organization, they may come under a litigation hold. Do you do that for everybody? Do you do it for certain people? For how long do you keep that information? Those kind of things. So just kind of wanted to set the stage with that first, but wanted to throw it back to you really quick. Do you, when you're doing, especially migrations, it sounds like there's probably lots of opportunity to re-examine kind of business objectives for restoring and backing data up. Do you commonly have that kind of discussion with folks when they're migrating? Does that come up at all?
Absolutely, I do try to have those discussions. So obviously my job is to, fulfill the conditions of a statement of work, of a migration project that I'm given for each specific user, each specific organization. And every one of these I get for different organizations, they all have different objectives. There are a few things that I really try to stress and include in the project if I at all can. It's not always up to me, but one of the things that I really try and focus on a lot with every organization that I do is Office 365, Exchange Online specifically, is not the same thing as Exchange on-premise. It's really a very different experience for an organization, for an administrator, for IT executives, people in charge, and for the management of the company overall. There are certainly some great aspects of Office 365 that I think are very beneficial for organizations. Things like, Microsoft is better at deploying Exchange than you. Their Exchange is going to be more reliable, have a better uptime. It's going to be better deployed. It's going to have better integration with SharePoint and with Link, Skype for Business. But there are also some things that organizations really have to learn to do differently. You really have to learn about IT processes, about the software differently. Many organizations are used to maybe about 3-year upgrade cycle. New version of Exchange comes out. Traditionally been about 3 years, and many organizations will skip a version. So, you're learning a new version every 6-7 years. With Office 365, you have to learn continually. You have to be currently educating yourself about the product and about what's changing, what the features are, and how you can best use those features and make them available to your user base. Lots of different features. I don't want to specifically go through all kinds of features, but things like you mentioned legal hold. That's a kind of a backup related feature. Not really, legal hold isn't a backup, but that's a feature that I think many organizations aren't using on premises, and it might be beneficial for organizations to use in Office 365. But before organizations can use it, they really need to understand what it is, what it's for, and how they can implement it to best serve them, and maybe more importantly, how not to implement and use it incorrectly.
Right. And that's what I find fascinating about the whole SaaS world, right? Like, and we're a SaaS provider, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But Microsoft is now too with 365, and what's great about it is you don't have to deal with lots and lots of the metal and the, thinking about IOPS and the servers and all of that. But you do have to think about the features that are coming out, and the features, they just turn them on, and there's not a lot of you know, and we get a little bit of a preview because we're a partner, and I'm sure you get a better preview than us maybe. But like, they just turn the features on, and then you go with it, and you see what the features are. So it is definitely, that continual learning is on our side for sure as well, delivering that downstream to people. You kind of talked about this already, but the native things. I think for data protection, specifically with Exchange, there's a couple of things that Microsoft does really well. And one of them are policies, and I think we kind of touched on that, and you talked about this already. So, and we'll talk about this again in a second, but this is different than what we're used to if we administer stuff online and we have our hands around the data center, and we have the servers and the storage and the application. We don't get to do a lot more than, we don't get to log into Exchange anymore when it's on Office 365. We can only log into our accounts and our tenants, and we can only manage what happens to our data that flows through Office 365 via policies. And so this is something I think that's important, but I'm curious to hear how you talk about it with, you know, when you're helping people migrate. But those business policies have to match your business objectives, which means you have to understand what they are when you implement them. Some of them can be overridden by users. This is what I put on the screen is actually the default policy for Exchange email. So this comes by default, but you can configure this specifically to how you want your policy to be about when email is on the tenant and when it gets deleted, how long it stays, and that kind of thing. But do you see businesses like having to do a lot of learning to get to come to an understanding about these policies and how to integrate them?
Yeah, absolutely. So message retention policies that you're specifically talking about here, this is something that actually Microsoft had to do some learning on themselves. Originally, and for the first, 4 years or so of Office 365, this default policy that you have shown up there was different than what it is now. Originally, there were instances when it would delete email. Those pretty much were only instances where people asked for it to delete email. If you delete an email, it goes to the deleted items folder. The default message retention policy would then clean out the deleted items folder after 30 days. After a few years of running Office 365, Microsoft found that, we can infer anyway, that they found that having email deleted from users' deleted items folder was causing consternation for users because Microsoft changed the message retention policy. If you look at it now, the default message retention policy will never automatically delete anything ever. You delete an item, it goes to the deleted items folder. If you don't delete it from your deleted items folder, it will stay there essentially forever. So, we can assume that Microsoft was getting cases of users saying, I deleted a message and it disappeared. Why did that happen?
Right. Pretty scary. So it's interesting too. Everybody's learning at the same time with our email. So I think the other thing we talked about as well as far as being native data protection for Office 365, in particular Exchange, is litigation hold. So it's part of the Exchange Online Archive package per user, so you have to enable it per user. And with litigation hold, every email is retained. But this is going back to, we talked about with email with backing email up being in two different stages. It's either you're backing it up to recover it back into the production environment, or it's archived. So because this is part of the archive package is what I'm assuming, it's not as easy to recover a single item as people think. First of all, whoever's your admin has to be part of a specific group called the Discovery Management Role Group. Then you can do an e-discovery search, which is basically between these time periods and these parameters, show me all the emails that match my search. Then you can put those into a PST file, and then you share that with the user. So have you had to do this before, to help people recover emails from litigation hold?
Yes, I certainly have. So I have seen people use litigation hold, intending it to be as sort of a backup safety net. which it's really not. That's not what it's for. I can give the example, or I guess I'll pretend I'm making up an example that never actually happened to anyone, but may have something similar at some point. A sales executive type guy had a particular folder, we'll say, sales for 2013, a couple years ago, in his inbox or in his mailbox that was deleted. Entire folder with, I don't know, potentially hundreds or thousands of message items that he probably didn't use a whole lot, but used occasionally, had them deleted, and then, wanted them recovered. Looking at this, it was past the email single item retention period, which is that feature within Exchange Online that allows you to go into your deleted items, and you can look at items that have been deleted out of there into that single item retention folder. So all his big folder was gone from there. So really the only option, fortunately the user was on legal hold, the only option was to recover that data from legal hold, but it's kind of that process that you talked about there, Gina, was what you have to go through to recover something like that. And it's really not a recovery process. It's not intended for backup recovery. It doesn't preserve the folder structure the way that a backup does. So, you're not going to be able to get email recovery from it exactly the way you expect. So you're going to end up recovering a whole bunch more stuff than what you need. You have to dump it out to the PSD file, and then somebody has to go through it. Either that user has to go through a bunch of stored email and figure out what he wants to save and what he doesn't, or an IT employee has to go through all that email and figure out what he's looking to recover. It's fairly costly and certainly inconvenient.
And either one of those options is really pretty, and it's not what we're used to, I think, is the thing, right? So as we move to these SaaS environments, we're not used to, as admins or even as users, not being able to crank up the backup application and mount, go to where we know the last good was and mount that backup, and then just most backup applications with Exchange will let you just copy and paste or pull them over to where the folder needs to be restored to, something like that. So it's very different than what we're used to doing in an on-premises environment, right? So, and that's kind of how cloud is. I mean, as I talk to people, this is what's becoming more and more apparent to me, is we've had really great marketing around cloud, but what does that really mean? And for those of us who have managed big data centers, we know that some kind of technical work is going on in the back end. We know there's some servers and all the rest of it, what's going on. And if you look at this slide, kind of the different ways that data centers can be managed, it's really changing IT's responsibilities for the data and towards the data and how we wrap our arms around things. So when it's on premises, we deal with everything from the users to the data to the application to the network, all the way down to the disks on the storage arrays or whatever you may have. When you move to infrastructure as a service, you give up control of the hardware and the network, and a lot of times the hypervisors, the virtualization, but you still retain the operating system and the application controls. If you move to platform as a service, you give up that control of the operating system. And then when you move to software as a service, which is what Office 365 is, you give up control of the application. So this means you, and I think I have this on the next slide a little better, kind of just focusing on that SaaS piece. So you are able to manage your users, the application administration, so the policies, and the data that your company really is relying on. That's why we use these applications, at any rate. And but you can't, you don't get to log into Exchange, for instance, and tool around and tinker with it. You don't get to log into even the Windows server that Exchange is sitting on. You don't get to log into the Hyper-V VM that it's on. You don't get to even know what the hardware is or what the network looks like. And that's why everybody goes to SaaS. That's kind of the cool thing about it, because like you said before, Microsoft's going to be way better at administering and deploying Exchange than one shop will ever be. It's just the truth of the matter. And the way they're doing things is pretty cool because they have kind of this model where the engineers now for the applications look at some of the trouble tickets, and they're involved with making sure as they are pushing out code and they're pushing out new parts of the product that it's going to work, because they're going to have to work with customers when it doesn't work. So you have that kind of support from an application level and OS level and on down the stack. That means it's all off of your, as a business, it's all off of your head. You don't have to deal with that mess anymore. What you have to deal with is those policies. You can't architect with the metal anymore. You're going to architect with policies. And you have to understand what all of these policies are to make sure that it fits your business needs, and it's going to keep your business up and running all the time, and it's going to preserve the data that enables your users to get work done for your company. And that's, you've said this already too, this is what Microsoft says with their SLAs. You know, it's your data, you own it, you control it. And we want it to be that way, right? If Microsoft was, if we have a user, if Microsoft sees a legitimate user on a tenant saying delete this data, Microsoft's going to say, okay, cool, we're going to delete that for you. And that's what we're trusting them to do. We're trusting them to execute on the commands that they see, even if it's deleting data. If they were squirreling data away someplace just in case we needed it and they could restore it for us, we'd be really upset because of privacy issues. We don't want them doing that either. So we're to this point, and this is with all SaaS applications, not just with Office 365, that on the right-hand side, like you were saying before, Microsoft, their policies about data loss are for Microsoft's business, not for your individual business. So they're going to make sure that there won't be a hardware failure. You're not going to have to worry about a down Exchange server ever again. They're going to take care of software failure. They're even going to deal with humongous disasters in a data center. They've got all that covered, and your data is going to be there, and they're going to make sure of that. But what we're responsible for as, you know, admins and business owners are the other things that can happen to the data, which we've kind of talked about. You know, human error, I can't say that word, programmatic errors. So if with Exchange, maybe you have some folks that are using an add-on to whatever method they're using to actually view their email. If that add-on does unexpected things with deleting email, that's a programmatic error, and it's not Microsoft's fault, probably not your user's fault, it's that extra application, but it's still being issued as a legitimate command, so that data will be gone. You can have people maliciously deleting data from the inside. You can have people from the outside still trying to hack in. And viruses can still impact a SaaS environment. And if it comes from a legitimate user, that's still your responsibility, not Microsoft's. I don't know if you want to comment on any of this. Have you seen any of this go on, or?
Yeah, you know, Microsoft is, I mean, Office 365, Microsoft is, they're really good at this stuff. There has never been, to the best of my knowledge, any data lost because of any sort of viruses or you know, that sort of issue within Office 365. That doesn't mean it's impossible. I think it's fairly unlikely, but it is certainly something, you know, if you have a business and you're relying on that data to run and maintain your business that obviously supports hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people's jobs and lives, you know, is that single point of, it's not really a single point of failure, but depending on how you look at it, Microsoft as a whole is that, you know, that single point of failure, or that single institution, relying on that, what you want to do. Certainly, I mean, they're absolutely good at it. I don't expect it to happen. But there have been outages in Office 365 because of, you know, things that they've done incorrectly. Hopefully those outages remain minor, but someday they may not be.
And they do. I mean, and I think that's the thing, is they take care of that data while it's there. But the human things that always happened on-prem are definitely going to happen in Office 365 to lose data too, I think. We have another poll, so let's see what that is. So if you're still with us, we're wondering what sort of incidents have you had with Office 365, if you're there already. So has been data you've had to have restored, or maybe there was a hybrid implementation and that's caused some issues for you with your availability, or just the service being unavailable. What's the worst incident you've seen with Office 365 without naming names?
See, the worst, I haven't, typically in my experience, I do see a fair number of users deleting their own data. That seems to happen way more often than I would think even possible. But when users have control of their own data, I guess they do silly things. I've seen a fair number of that. There's not, I can't think of any, terrible, certainly there's not been any terrible systematic-wide Office 365 catastrophes that have happened. There have been a couple outages. There was about a 4-hour outage this summer, and one, again, about 4 hours the year before, last summer. Both of those were around Active Directory, basically Office 365 growing too large, too fast for Windows Azure Active Directory to keep up. But actual, the worst, I think, real problem I've seen in Office 365 would be, again, not really a user, but administrator. I did see one guy that deleted a number of accounts from his on-premises Active Directory, and because that was dir synced up to Office 365, those accounts were deleted from Office 365, which then disassociated those accounts with the mailboxes. Now, normally that wouldn't be a huge problem with the design of Office 365 because mailboxes aren't purged just because the account is deleted. So that really shouldn't be that big of a problem. But this particular incident, what the guy did when he realized that he deleted accounts was he quickly recreated accounts. Tried to replace them so that it wasn't, nobody knew that he deleted a bunch of accounts. The problem is when you create a new account, Active Directory, even if you give it the same name, sees it as a different account. So when those new accounts were then dir synced into Office 365, it created new accounts in Office 365 and created new mailboxes with them and purged the old mailboxes.
Oh, man.
That I think that's probably the most terrible thing I've seen somebody do, and it's pretty uncommon, but that's
but you can definitely do some damage if you don't know. Yeah, if you don't know it goes back to the whole policies, right? And it's a little bit different, like you were saying, on 365 than it is on-prem. So if you don't know those differences, you can do some damage really quick. Let's see what the poll results were. Maybe if I get my. Okay. Okay, I tried to push it.
You go up at the top center of your preview screen. There's a one. Yeah, there you go.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so this is what y'all said about your incidents. Incidents where you had to have some data restored, about 28.5. Hybrid implementation, 23.8, and then just service being unavailable, 47. So interesting. I think as we go through and start learning, keep learning from each other and hearing what's actually going on with people, I just find these examples just very interesting to talk about. There we go. So, as we go through stuff, and Microsoft is doing an amazing job. Like we've been saying, it's a different world going to 365. You really have to understand policies and what's going on. So if there is, there's a gap where there is a possibility of having data loss, production data loss that you'll have to put back very quickly, maybe it's time to start thinking about that and wrapping heads around that. And then you wrap your heads around who's responsible. So is that a backup admin like it was, on premises? Is it the Office 365 admins? Who's responsible if there's data loss? What have you seen in your experience? Are people, because I'm seeing a little bit of both, that people are either trying to fit in the processes that they had on premises for all this with with going to 365, and I've also seen just kind of adopting new ways of doing backups and thinking about them because there's not as much involved, from an on-premises admin. So what have you seen?
Yeah, so it really depends on the organization. There are a lot of organizations that are moving to Office 365, and depending on the size of the organization, I think is often the determining factor in how they're best going to be able to adjust to this change. Smaller organizations, I think, are by and large, already have a pretty small IT staff, 1 or 2 guys, and those organizations are just, that guy takes over all the Office 365 maintenance. He just doesn't have to worry about keeping the server up, that sort of thing. Big organizations, though, and I've moved a few fairly large organizations into Office 365. That's where things get a little more confusing and a little more difficult, and really the organization has to culturally work out, how they want to handle this, whether they may maintain that sort of organization where they have separate Exchange administrators and SharePoint administrators and Link administrators, or if those teams kind of get combined into just Office 365 administrator type guys. Right. How their roles are combined. So really, I think it's the larger organizations that have a lot of work to do in figuring out how they're going to handle this migration to cloud services like this.
Right, right. My laptop is acting funky. I'm really sorry. There we go. So I'm going to move quickly because we do want to get to some questions, and we're having such good conversation with ourselves. See if anybody else has questions we can open up to. But another thing, just to think about, these are just things to think about going, to a SaaS environment, is your compliance is going to probably expect you to do that as well. I went too fast that time. Compliance reasons will also be behind making sure you have backup, making sure your data is continually available. And that's what Spanning does. Just to talk a little bit about us. Spanning backup for Office 365, we do daily automated backup. You can also do backups on demand, but most especially recovery for Office 365. They're granular point-in-time restore. So you can put an entire folder back, an entire account back, or just an individual email item. We're pretty good at showing what we're doing and how the backup status is going, because even that is a little different when you're doing a SaaS backup. We empower end users to do their own restores. The design's fully responsive. You can use it from any device, which is a very Microsoft way of doing things now too, be it a tablet or a mobile or your laptop. One thing we do too is cross-user restore. So if a great use case for that is if you do have people leaving the organization and you want to retain their email and the data that they've been working with, you don't have to put that on hold, continual hold. You can actually assign that to a different user as a new folder with all of that data in there, so they can just pick up the data and keep running with it. Let me see where I am. And this is just a screenshot of how we work. And this is the bigger thing. Like, we copy this data for backups. All of the backup companies do this. But putting it back really quickly within the application itself, where it was in the application, either the same user or to a different user to use that information. Much different than, like you saw with litigation hold. You've got this long list of things. You'll have the data there someplace, but how fast can you get it back so people are back with their mail, which people have a really emotional attachment to that too. You're back with your mail, you're able to get back to work, all is good in the world. This is just showing how it's good on any device. And the way we work is important too. So we are a cloud-to-cloud backup. We are a SaaS service ourselves. So to use us, you enable an admin account. You use an Office 365 admin account. You subscribe to our service. You decide which users you want to enable with a license, and then we just automatically start backing it up once a day. We use a combination of the APIs that Microsoft provides, as well as we work with AWS Compute, and we use those to store the data. And then if you do need to restore that data, that we've backed up, do the same thing kind of backwards and put it back into Office 365 itself. So if you've gone to 365 because you don't want to deal with with servers and operating systems and applications and storage and all that, we continue that investment. You're in the cloud, you should back up from the cloud, kind of how we see it. And these are all the reasons to do that. So right now we protect Exchange online, and really quickly we're going to be adding in about a month calendars, and early next year we'll be adding OneDrive. So getting to where we need to be. And here's just additional resources. So we have a really great ebook about things to think about with Office 365, where there's gaps and the crazy things that our users and admins, silly things we do sometimes to lose data. And just, you can try it out. It's really easy to try it out for 14 days and actually see what it does. And, of course you have questions, but just love to ping me, and I would love to tell you more about that. Or we can answer some questions right now. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, we got a few questions in here, so I'm going to try to get to a few of these, and then Gina, if you see any in there that you'd like to answer, certainly speak up and go ahead. Let me start at the top here. Someone asked, what is MRM? Sorry, we referred to that a little bit earlier in the presentation. MRM, acronym stands for Messaging Records Management. It's the retention policies within Exchange. Exchange 2010 and forward. They had a different system in Exchange 2007 and earlier. But MRM is retention policies. So it's a policy that runs against mailboxes in Office 365. It runs against every mailbox. There's a default message retention policy. And it can take really 3 actions against any items that are in your inbox based on the amount of time that those items have been in there. It can either archive those items, move them to your archive mailbox. It can delete those items, remove them from your mailbox, or what's the third action? Archive, delete,
remove.
I don't know. Maybe retain?
Or move. Maybe just move. They can move them too, right?
Well, you can move it to your archive. So maybe that's what I was thinking of. I don't know why I said 3. Really, it just deletes or it deletes or archives items in your inbox, in your mailbox. Okay, let me look through these questions. Why is Microsoft better at Exchange than IT professional? Okay, so fair enough. Somebody asked, I had mentioned earlier that that Microsoft, it said that claimed that Microsoft's better at Exchange than IT professionals. I think what I really mean by that, of course, there are great professionals, and you can deploy Exchange and have very solid deployments that on-premise that work great, and I'm a huge fan of on-premises Exchange as well. But really what I mean is if there's an issue with Exchange, Microsoft has the guy that wrote that code that's going to look at it. So if Office 365, if there's an issue, we'll say public folders stop working for some reason, the guy that wrote that particular piece of code is going to get a page in the middle of the night and be responsible for fixing that issue. So really what I mean there is within Office 365, Microsoft has the people that are programming that know that software really inside and out, even at a much better level than any of us possibly could, because we don't see how Exchange works. We don't get to see the code. That's really what I mean by that. Anything else in here specifically that you want to address, or should I grab another one, Gina?
You can grab another one. I can address any of them because there's a ton of them in here. So let's see. But there's a lot of them in there that I think are really good for you too.
Okay.
So Brenda, that number 12 looks good if you know that one, because I would like to know the answer to it. That's why.
Number 12, issues in transferring data between SharePoint Online and a local computer, file corruption, creating a link, not transferring, uncontrolled and unexpected. So, okay. So essentially, what the question is this person is having some issues with file corruption between SharePoint Online and the local computer. My guess is, without having seen specifically what's going on there, is that the issue isn't really SharePoint Online. The issue is the OneDrive for Business plugin. It's called, Groove EXE. It's built off an old Microsoft application that was developed by Ray Ozzie some 15 years ago or so, called Groove, that actually does that file transfer between your computer and SharePoint Online. I don't think the issue in this particular case, my guess would be that the issue isn't really with SharePoint Online corrupting documents. It's with that OneDrive for Business sync application that's syncing applications back to the local computer, and sometimes that does cause corruption. Microsoft is certainly aware that that issue does happen sometimes, specifically on older machines. Works better on Windows 10, I can definitely say that. Certainly if you're using XP, it can be a huge problem on XP. Don't use XP. is great bit of advice there. But yeah, I think that sync engine can be problematic, and sometimes really the solution for that, unfortunately, is to manage your files through the web browser, to manually download stuff that way if you're getting file corruption. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah. Thank you for taking that. It was interesting. There's a couple about price, so I'll go ahead and address that. So Spanning is, the list price is $48 per user per year. We were acquired by EMC back in the fall. So if, call us up and talk to us, I think that the list price, is variable sometimes depending on amount of users, blah, blah, blah. You also, if you have an EMC sales account executive, you want to talk to them to see what they can do for you. And it's all inclusive. So it's unlimited storage. So however big your files are, that's fine. And as we add applications from the Office 365 suite, the price stays the same. You're not going to pay any extra. So once we add calendars, it's included. Once we add OneDrive, it's included. Once we add SharePoint, it's included. I think I saw a question about that too. Right now, we are not backing up SharePoint. It's on the list after OneDrive, so it's on the roadmap. I don't have a really good time frame for it right now, though. OneDrive will come first for us. So I hope that answers that.
Do you have, Gina, do you have partner reseller options for MSPs?
I believe that we do, and I know that we are absolutely, there's actually on the website. If you go to the website, you can pull down some more information about that, or reach out to me, and I'll get you connected to the right person for that as well.
Alrighty. I'm looking at this. I like the idea of using a PST file. I have a PST file on my desktop. If I'm using my tablet, my concern is, where do I put the PST file? Geez, PST files are a terrible idea. I don't like PSTs personally, for a number of reasons. I think the first and biggest reason why I don't like PSTs, they used to be a corruption issue. In previous versions of Outlook, PSTs used to corrupt, especially over 2 gigabytes very often. It's not so much a problem now if you're using more current versions of Outlook. 2013 or Outlook 2016 is out now. Corruption's not really so much of an issue with PSTs now, but I think the main reason why I say I dislike PSTs is because if users are storing their data in PSTs, it means that users are managing their data. Users, that data is no longer in the control of hopefully your IT professionals who are very good at running your Exchange servers. People that are backing up your servers, keeping everything safe. So The question is, where do I put the PST file? My recommendation is you put your data back in your live mailbox and don't use a PST. Just because that's, cutting your backup department out of, or your IT department out of protecting that data for you. Yes, Gina.
I was going to say, there's not even a concept of PST on Exchange Online, right? That's what that archive folder is. The archive mailbox is for, right?
Well, you certainly can create a PST file with Outlook when your mailbox in Exchange Online. You certainly could.
Okay.
But again, that's taking your data out of Microsoft's hands, out of that expensive service that your organization is paying for, and storing it on your laptop where you only have a single hard drive, and
right.
Somebody could just run away with your laptop, or hard drive could fail, or any number of things. So I recommend against PSTs pretty strongly.
Yeah, so Spanning or any other backup application I've ever worked on, because I've done this for a while, can't reach into your laptop either. So there's no way to back it up. And if you're not doing it, you can depend on your IT department to figure out something to do it, so it can be backed up and restored.
All righty, got another question for you there, Gina. Does Spanning meet FINRA/SEC? I assume SEC is Securities and Exchange Commission. I don't know what FINRA is. Does it meet archive requirements?
I am not familiar with that particular regulation, but I will find out, and I will put it someplace, probably write a blog post and put the answer. If that person wants to reach out to me, it's Gina Rosenthal at Spanning.com. Gina.Rosenthal, sorry, at Spanning.com. If you want to reach out with a question, I can definitely chase that down for you and let you know.
Okay, while we're just wrapping up here, we have just a couple minutes left. I'm going to jump in and give kind of a generic consultant answer to that. Does X meet, whatever requirements? The generic answer is all these IT protection, IT compliance rule sets out there, they work very much like your taxes, which is to say, if I told you I made X amount of money last year, how much do I owe in taxes? There is no direct answer for that. It's really, everybody's here on the call, I assume, done your taxes. You kind of make up your answer, and then you tell the IRS, this is what my answer is, here's what I owe you. When what's really important is if the IRS comes back to you, you have to be able to defend your answer. So as to does X technology meet these compliance requirements, what I always tell customers, try and help customers with, is provide a good answer. Have a good answer for why we made this decision, why we made this archiving decision, why we made this backup decision, why we made this compliance decision ready, so that if you are ever audited, you can say, this is why we made this decision. We went with this technology because it protects us this way. So hopefully that gives a real quick answer there.
I think that's a great answer, and that's depending on what the regulations are, right? So from security standpoint, we're probably covered because we do meet most of the major security compliance standards. There are some other things depending on how long we keep the emails, that kind of thing. That might I'm not really sure. So it's financial industry is what somebody else said in the comments. So not really sure about it, but. Okay. I liked your generic consultant answer was awesome.
Well, thank you very much, and we are at the top of the hour, so we are going to end our webcast here, but we would like to thank you all for attending today's event, sponsored by Spanning by EMC and presented by Redmond Magazine. Thank you all for attending, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
That concludes our webcast, everyone. Thank you all for your participation.